That's how most students practice. And in order to teach them how to properly practice, I like to show them this example, which I have personally coined as the insanity example. I could probably work on the name. But why I named it the insanity example is because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So when I do this example in front of my students, I tell them, imagine you're the teacher and I'm the student. What would you tell me to do? And so then I show them this and I go, And most of my students look at me and go, Mr. Garan, slow down. And I go, bingo, that's exactly the point. And therefore, to open up this video for how to practice in 2026, the first one is slow down. In our specific example, if you just slow it down, you might be able to get through a little bit of the piece. And yes, if you turn on any video of this song, it'll be, but you don't want to go there and you don't want to start with that. Now there are three types of practice. There is learning practice where you're actually figuring out what notes to play. There is fixing practice where you're getting better and you're smoothing things out. And then there's performance practice, which is phrasing, emotion, and how you can actually perform the piece and put it all together. For the purpose of being very particular, today's example is mostly going to focus on the second one, which is where you've done this with your teacher and you're assigned homework and he says, get better at this by next week. This is going to be that fixing practice where you actually kind of know the notes, but you have to get better at it. With that out of the way, my second piece of advice is going to be get really good at sectioning and isolating the parts that you really need to get better at. The parts that just slow you down the most. Those are the ones that you want to section off, say it's a measure, maybe it's two, and you get really, really, really good at them. Once you can do that, you don't just say, I'm done and move forward. You attach the previous measure to it. Then do that a bunch. Make sure you're really good at it. Then attach the next measure to it. Do that, make sure you're really good at it until you can go way back to the beginning. To show a small example, let's go ahead and look at fur release. The first little hurdle with this piece perhaps occurs around measure roughly 13. We know the piece. And at measure 13, we have our first kind of big boy technique, which is going to look like this. Again. And then you move forward to. A lot of students play this, and when they get to that part, they have to dramatically slow down. So what you want to do in this kind of scenario is you want to isolate measure 13, which is just this. And do this over and over again. Of course, what I'm showing you here would probably take you 5-ish minutes to get really good at before you can glue the next section on or double check the next section, which would be again, again. So you would take your time, you would make sure you got this. Then, congratulations, we can do one and we can do two. Now we gotta combine them. And if for some reason we can't combine them, we've gotta go back and really, really iron that out. So here's what that would look like. Another part that we can use with fur release, because it's in front of us, would be kind of the B section where it sounds like this. This right here. A lot of students struggle with. So my advice, like we talked about, would be isolate just this measure, which in my arrangement is 25, 26, 27, 28, which would be this. Again. Then let's be a little smoother here. Then attach the beginning to it. By the time you get there, you have to dramatically slow down. You must slow down the entire thing. To summarize my second tip, once again, get really good at sectioning and isolating the parts that you really need to work on before gluing it to the rest of the piece. Tip number 3 is don't practice everything. A practice session should really only focus on you getting done exactly what you need to get done, and most of the time it's the stuff that you suck the most at and you're the worst at. If we have a piece like this, and a lot of the pieces are like this, where in our scenario, the first two lines are dramatically easier than the next section, you don't need to play it at all. So let me go ahead and show an example. I will start from the beginning of this piece. So we can very much see how the first two lines of the song, first two lines of the song are fairly easy. They're all in first position. They're very short, simple notes compared to, you know, when you get to the third then, which is now, if you have to work on, say, line 4 or 5 or a measure within that little section, doing the first two lines is very much useless. So the lesson here is going to be use your practice time wisely, because you want to use that time on things that are very hard and require a lot of repetition. If you're having a practice session in the beginning, for example, is so easy that you can literally fall asleep playing it, don't waste time on it. Spend your practice time here, get really good at this, glue it together, smoothen it out, and move on. Tip number 4 is a little bit controversial. Should you use a metronome? Now, you guys know me quite well, and I'm not one to shy away from a controversial opinion if it's gonna be the best thing for the kid. And so, here's my opinion. If the kiddo is just starting out or is in the beginner stage and hasn't quite entered the intermediate stage, I would actually not advise using a metronome. Metronomes are very, very, very boring. And here's where the elitist teacher will come in and say, but they need to learn proper tempo and proper timing, and the metronome is the best way to do that. I actually wouldn't argue with you. The metronome is the best way they're gonna learn to do that. But if they're a beginner and they're young and you try to throw metronome practice at them, you have my personal guarantee they will be bored out of their mind, and within 6 months, you will say, I don't want to learn this instrument. Metronome makes things so boring and so repetitive, and it sucks the life out of whatever you're doing. Now, if you're an intermediate player or an advanced player, a metronome becomes a tool that you quite literally are going to need. The elitist level, metronome is everything we've ever wanted. My advice, it depends on their age and what level they're on. Most of the time, not if they're a beginner. Now, in my notes, when thinking of what advice to give, I wrote something that even I was like, should I say this? And in my notes, it said practicing shouldn't be fun. And this is where everyone's like, but isn't your whole thing keeping music fun? And yes, but I gotta say I'm quite guilty of this, and I think everyone is. A lot of the times when I sit down to practice, I just end up having fun. I just end up playing everything I want to play, whether it's violin or piano, and it's awesome. So I kind of often have to remind myself, when I go to practice, I'm actually there to iron out the things that I'm not so good at. There are some exceptions. I've had a lot of students that actually love playing scales, and so when I assign them scales practice, they actually have a lot of fun. So this is not like a golden rule to follow all the time, but do remind yourself that practicing should be something that feels like you're lifting weights. You know, when you go to lift weights, you're not just gonna grab the 5 pounds and just do this and say, that was great, and go home. You're gonna want to struggle a bit to break down the muscle, to get that muscle memory in this case. And so that's kind of my advice when it comes to that. This next one really ties in with the first piece of advice, but it's gonna go a little more in depth. When you're practicing, you want to prioritize smoothness over the speed. If a certain section that you're trying to practice, you just can't seem to get it, that means you're going too fast. Generally, you should be able to play any piece slowly all the way through, or any section that you're trying to work on slowly and smoothly all the way through. In our example with Moonlight Sonata, before I try to do this, I need to be able to do this. All the way through. The the entire thing like this before I even think about speeding it up. With the time that we have, if we kind of take everything and put it in one little box, it will be when you're practicing, use your time wisely. Don't practice the stuff that is very easy to do and you can do it in your sleep. Slow it down, prioritize smoothness over speed, and really practice the parts that you are the weakest at. But practicing is an art in itself, and I would be lying if I told you that every time I sit down and I practice, I follow these. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.